You had a really interesting piece, and I wanted to quote a part of it, where you talk about how Americans came to accept through civic education and constant self-criticism that America was one of the few successful multiracial and multi-ethnic democracies in history. I mean, today's Columbus Day, so I know most people, at least in politics and culture, have spent a good part of today arguing about this Italian explorer funded by Spanish Catholics who came over here, and because, you know, the Americas, as you know, were just complete place. It was the Garden of Eden. I mean, there was no evil, there was no war, there was no sin, selfishness, no enslavement, and it was that Italian that brought it all over here. I mean, at least if you listen to the woke crowd, the CRT advocates, that's what they promote. And so that is, I mean, talk to us a little bit about that, because that's what I've always really loved about this country. Everyone's centered around freedom and not ethnicity or not a religion or anything like that, just freedom. And melting pot used to be a great adjective before it really became unofficially banned by the woke crowd. Share your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I think people have to understand history is tragedy. It's not melodrama where you go back and say, according to the present, we're going to use these values to condemn the past. When people from Europe, the Spanish arrived, let's say in Mexico, to take one example, in 1521 and 2, the Aztecs, just 30 years earlier, had killed over 20,000 people in a 4-day period in human sacrifice. So it wasn't paradise. And yes, they brought diseases, the Europeans did. And yes, they brought whooping cough. And yes, they brought religion. But they also, I mean, you could make the argument that they also inherited tobacco. And there was more sugar here. Sugar was soon going to be grown here, and cocaine. So we don't want to go into this, well, the Europeans brought all these bad things, but indigenous people were completely pristine, and that's not true. That's not how history works. But as far as Knights of Columbus, there was a poll, you remember, Dana, it was 2-1 Americans wanted to have the national holiday. And here we have this ridiculous situation where millions of indigenous people, and that's not my term, but their description from southern Mexico or Central America, are risking their lives to leave their indigenous cultures and governments and go north of the border. And why is that? Because of market capitalism, constitutional protected freedom. These ideas were not here in America until after 1492, and yet people who are indigenous don't have to accept them. They're under no compulsion to come north, but they want to. They want to accept a different paradigm from what had been the norm before Columbus and is the norm in many places after Columbus. And how ironic that where I live in this Mexican-American community, I know so many Mexican-Americans who are members of willingly the Knights of Columbus, the Catholic charitable organization, because it was founded to help middle class and working class immigrants. That was the idea. Poor Italians were being discriminated, and then their focus shifted to Mexican American people. So this is an elite driven, top down Latin. It's like the word Latinx. I mean, nobody that I've ever met who's Mexican American ever described themselves as Latinx. Just like nobody I've ever met said we've got to get rid of Columbus Day outside of where I work at a campus. So it's an artificially driven.
You bring up a really good point. You bring up a very good point in that, you know, the ideas of our republic, that was also brought over. You know, the ideas of individual liberty, all of that was brought over, which now kind of, this is where we're at, because we have people telling us that these are all very bad ideas, and it's somehow evidence of privilege. You know, I know in your book you touch on this, and you have quite a lot in your writings as well, the tribalism, because that also, and that's very much encouraged by the left, because I just remember, and I know some factions of the right are getting into it, but by and large, people who are constitutionally minded and people who just simply want to be left alone have never really bought into that idea of tribalism that much. We don't look at issues as people or vice versa. But it's really being encouraged by the left. And you made a great point and made me think of this when you mentioned how nobody watches the Oscars. Usually, used to, everybody did. And then you would have those water cooler conversations the next day. You don't have those cultural touch points anymore. You don't have that fellowship. Even if you disagreed with a lot of what people are saying, you still had that cultural fellowship. And now you have this heightened tribalism. I'm not even quite sure how that is reduced. I mean, how is a tribalism like this, where reason can exist in that space? How do you even combat that? Or are we past a point of no return?
Well, it's top driven and it's careerist, because we're the only multiracial democracy republic that's ever worked. Brazil tries it, India tries it with less success. So everybody knows that if you or I want to go to China or Japan or Mexico and say, I want to be a citizen and I want to advance in your society, we're not going to be able to make it because we don't look like those people. Maybe even the same is true of Europe. I don't think that Barack Obama could be Chancellor of Germany. It's only this country that allows everybody of every background. So why would we tamper with it? And all I can come up with is, I don't believe it's sincere when I see the BLM co-founder, who's the self-described Marxist, Ms. Quellar's, buying 4 homes and moving to Topanga Canyon near Malibu, or Oprah complaining from a $90 million estate in Montecito to Meghan Markle and her $14 million, or the Obamas in a $24 million Martha's Vineyard estate venturing out once in a while to lecture us how illiberal they are. So I think it's kind of I don't know, it's a guilt or projection. I have so much and I feel guilty, so I'm going to be on the cutting edge of societal, social justice activism, and then I get to keep all my stuff. And it's really disgusting how and the real issue is class. It always is. Middle class people have legitimate complaints that they're shrinking in their buying power, but it's not coordinated exactly with race anymore. And so people who are very wealthy of non-white persuasions, and they want to continue to say that they're victimized, even though if you look at statistics, I think there's 16 different ethnic groups that make more money, and I'm proud that that's true, than so-called white people. So we've transcended race. Our biggest question is class, but the left just wants to hit race, because I feel that their issues are no longer appealing to 51% of the people. So they either have to change the demography or change the system, get rid of the Electoral College, or the 9-person Supreme Court, or the filibuster, or open the border, but anything other than to try to convince people of the logic of their arguments. They just can't do it because they're not logical.